So welcome everyone. We can see people joining in there, and we're delighted to have you with us this evening. I'll just wait 30 seconds and then we'll get started proper. Okay, we've got a good gang in with us now, so we might get going, and I know more people will join over the next little while. So just to introduce myself first, I'm Patrick Burke, and I'm the current president of the Literacy Association of Ireland, and I work in DCU in literacy education. And I'm joined this evening for this webinar on planning for literacy from big picture to practical steps by Maureen Colleran, who is another member of the Literacy Association of Ireland Executive Committee. And Maureen is an assistant lecturer in creative and digital technologies in Marino Institute of Education. And she is a former primary school principal from Scoil Nicholas Nifa, Dunmore, County Galway, where I happen to be from myself, and is also very experienced as a former literacy advisor with what was the Professional Development Service for teachers. So between the two of us, we're hoping that we'll be able to give you an overview of what we would see as the most important points to bear in mind at the start of a new school year as people start thinking about planning for literacy in particular. Now, you'll note that if you want to put questions to us, the question and answer box is open. So we will keep an eye on that during the webinar, and we'll come back to it as well later on in the webinar. And the webinar is being recorded so that it can be shared afterwards. And we'll be happy also to share the slides after the webinar. Maureen, did you want to add anything in before we got going?
No, but just thank you to everyone for coming along on the second week of September when everyone is no doubt wrecked with getting ready. So we're just delighted to be here with you.
Super. So we'll get going. We're going to share the slides over the course of the next hour or so. And we're hoping as well that we can have a conversation. Maureen and I had a great conversation yesterday when we were putting together the slides on, I suppose, our ideas about planning and what we think are the most important messages. So we'll have a back and forth as we go through the slides as well. But the overview, we're going to start with just the big picture. What are the kind of the non-negotiables, the things you really do need to make sure are reflected from a literacy perspective when you're thinking about preparation across a school year and how that might link with the primary language curriculum. Then Maureen is going to bring us through the requirements. So what do you actually certainly have to have in your preparation and planning as a primary school teacher in Ireland. And then we'll get into 5 things we think you should think about when you're actually putting your plans together, bearing in mind all of that. So those kind of high level big ideas for planning, what the preparation for teaching and learning guidance actually requires, and then how the two of them kind of come together. So that's our plan for the next hour or so. So we'll get started with that big picture piece. And when we were talking yesterday, we were saying, we in Ireland we do tend to spend a lot of time thinking about planning. And thankfully, the guidance on preparation for teaching and learning clarifies a lot of that. But what I always find really intriguing is that whenever I am reading, let's say, a research article from another jurisdiction about, some really good literacy practice or some brilliant idea for how to teach X, Y, or Z in literacy, they never write in those articles about how many rows were in the planning documents that the teachers were using, or do they need a differentiation box, and if so, which row should it go in, or anything to do with like the length of the plans. These are just things that, um, when it boils down to it, how you actually present planning in particular, like the actual physical document, isn't something always that you need to spend that much time worrying about. And I'm hoping that when Maureen goes through what the guidance actually says, that you'd be clear on that. But I suppose what I want to get out of the way straight away is that it's not that one way of planning is better than the other, or that it needs to be done in a particular way. Now, that's not to say that there aren't certain things that you need to be mindful of when you're thinking about teaching literacy in the classroom. But it does mean that what's most important is what you're actually doing in the classroom and the thought that's gone into it, not how it's recorded on paper. Would you
And
agree, Maureen?
I would come in on that. I think what to sum up what you're saying is there now needs to be a culture shift when it comes to planning slash preparations, depending on what you call it. That it had nearly gotten out of control. That a lot of people felt that the worth of their teaching was directly linked to how many pages of their Kunzis me soon, and that's not the case. That has very, very clearly been I suppose dispelled, so it's just bearing that in mind.
Yeah, and I think when it is important, yeah, just not to get too hung up on those sort of things. Okay, so what is it that we actually know? Like when you do go and read like the research on literacy and it starts talking about what's most important in terms of preparation, these are the things on the slide here that come out again and again and again. Not how they're formatted in a Word document or a Google Doc or what goes into the filing cabinet or into a Google Drive in your school, but the substance of what's sitting behind that. And regardless of what template you may or may not be using, when you're looking through your preparation and your planning for literacy, there are certain things that we know need to be either appearing in the documentation or that you're thinking about when you're teaching. And Maureen will get more into the terminology around that and how it's actually recorded later. But these things are sometimes they're called the big five or the big six, having appropriate attention to word recognition and spelling, so the kind of the code-based skills, making sure that in the early years of school, skills like phonological awareness and phonics are being taught, and that will, I suppose, deplete in focus as children go through school. But there will be some kids in upper classes in primary school who will still be needing support with that. The other big idea there is around fluency, children having lots of practice on actually reading and having good reading modeled for them so that they're building up that automaticity in their reading. The other thing, again, regardless of how it's recorded or whether it's recorded at all, maybe it's in here, is that vocabulary needs to focus or needs to feature strong focus on building children's breadth of language knowledge and the depth of knowledge. And included in that are skills related to being able to like break words up, like morphology, knowing prefixes and suffixes and root words and so on. All of this gets put into practice, I suppose, with comprehension. And like comprehension, interestingly, won't be just seen as a feature in your preparation for literacy or English or Gaeilge. Comprehension is being built all the time through all the learning that children are encountering across the curriculum when they're building knowledge and building their understanding of what happens in subjects like science and geography and so on. And comprehension strategies are just part of that. So the language curriculum very clearly signals the importance of comprehension strategies, but they're just one part of what's required to be able to comprehend a piece. And the last point there about writing. So there's different things you need to be able to do to write. So knowing the craft of writing, so how genres work, for example, then the more the kind of the mechanics of it, like conventions like sentence construction and punctuation, the process of writing, so how to plan, how to revise, how to write, and then bold there's handwriting, and in particularly in the early years, these are things that need explicit teaching. All of this is embedded by oral language, and we also need to remember, or it's all underpinned, sorry, by oral language. We also need to remember choice, motivation, children having some level of agency over, for example, what books they're getting to read and so on. So there's no way that we can do like a deep dive on everything to do with everything in literacy because we only have an hour. But these are the kinds of things that, regardless of whether they're in visible or invisible preparation, these are the things that you need to prioritize in teaching. And it's teaching explicitly around these concepts and skills rather than being driven too much by what's the next page in a book, for example. These are the kinds of things that need to be foregrounded all of these are represented in the primary language curriculum throughout the learning outcomes. So they're there in
Can
one.
I,
Yeah, go
can,
ahead, Maureen.
just to come in just on that slide, um, and you mentioned like textbooks, anything like that. But when you look at these 5/6, when you include the oral language, they are the building blocks. And don't, I suppose, underestimate how important they are, or trying to do anything fancy without having the foundational work done first.
Totally. Thanks, Maureen. Um, there's one last slide I have before I hand over more formally to Maureen to talk about the preparation for teaching and learning guidance. And that is a little, just a smidgen on the pedagogy piece, the how are you actually doing it, or the learning experiences. And you can cut this up and divide it out in different ways, like what are the practices that need to be there. What I've just drawn on here is the work of Timothy Shanahan. So he wrote in 2021 around the characteristics of high quality literacy teaching for the whole class, or for the whole group of children that you might have in front of you. And the things that he highlighted were the importance of explicit instruction. So directly and carefully teaching the new skills. So not leaving anything to chance, right? Differentiated instruction for children who need it. So you're for the most part trying to keep everyone, would say, reading at class level text, but then supplementing that with small group work where it's required on particular skills. And we'll talk more about that later. Intense lessons where it's needed. So this might be for a child who is at the top of the continuum of support and needs, for example, explicit support in phonics, maybe for a dyslexic child. He also, this next bit is kind of obvious. Well-designed lessons. What does he mean by that? That there's plenty of interaction. It's not just the teacher talking for, 40 minutes, and that there's clear examples of what's being delivered, I suppose, in literacy. And then well implemented lessons. And I suppose an important point here is this is stuff you're never going to write anywhere in a plan, but things like effective transitions, classroom management, are students actually engaged? You're going nowhere regardless of what's in any plan, scheme, visible or invisible, if those sorts of things aren't right. And these are kind of high level things to think about when you're looking through your or thinking about your preparation, or looking at planning for literacy this coming school year. Maureen, did you want to add anything there on
No,
those?
I'm going to touch on some of these again in the next document, so I can come back to them.
Perfect. Right, Maureen, let's get into that. So,
So I'm going to chat through the preparation for teaching and learning documents. Some of you are familiar with it, but I still think it's always good to go back and familiarize yourselves with it. So this was released in April 2021, when we had this conversation yesterday when we were coming out of one of the lockdowns. And I feel it kind of came out under the radar for a little while, and CPD wasn't offered for a while. Um, it came off the back of curriculum change. So the primary language curriculum had been released in 2019. And one of the main things teachers were coming back with is they wanted some very explicit guidance around planning. So the NCCA worked with the PDST and the NCSE, and together then with the inspectorate and representatives from the Department of Education. And it took a couple of years to create, and then it was released in 2021. So one of the things I just want you to think about first for a second is think back 3 weeks ago when the weather was much better, our tans were much stronger, everything like that. And think about you were starting to get ready for school, and you might have been setting up your classroom and getting ready. Just think about the different things you did. The chances are you might have had to go into the school in the days leading up to it. You might have had to move chairs and tables, or still move classrooms. You might have had to put up displays, organize all of the free books, getting them ready with their kids' names on it. Then you might have been looking at, okay, right, first day, what am I actually going to do with them? I need to get to know them. And you were looking at all these sort of things. You probably had a meeting with last year's teacher, or a phone call or a conversation, maybe the special ed teacher, the SNA, all of this would have been happening. And so when it comes to it, so if you move on, if you click on the next one, so that brings there are three different types of preparation. So we have our visible, we have our invisible, and recorded preparation. So if we think of the visible preparation here, um, we're looking at uh, sorting out the classroom, sorting out the books, putting up displays, getting everything ready that you can actually see. As the year goes on, correcting copies. That's all your visible preparation. It might be going out buying resources. You can see all of that. The next one then you have is the invisible preparation. That's your conversation with parents, with maybe it could be the CNO, the special ed teacher. It could be researching the Vikings online or reading the novel you're going to teach in a week's time. That's all invisible. No one will ever know that it's done except for you. And then the final one is your recorded preparation. So that is everything that's written down. So it could be your short term, it could be your long term, it could be the student support plans, but it also could be the likes of filling out forms for professionals, like maybe an educational psychologist. That's all recorded preparation. So if we think of kind of the weight of all of these, the previous page in the document, it actually says that these are all interlinked, they complement each other. And the very last line is that the three components are equally valued. So if the same weight has been put on the visible, the invisible, and the recorded preparation, and you ask yourself, how much time do you spend on your fortnightly versus, and that's just one aspect of your recorded preparation versus the visible. You need to ask yourself, are you spending the same amount of time on all of them because they're equally weighed? So that's something going forward to bear in mind, that it is okay now to spend the time researching a topic or having that conversation with a parent. That is all part of your preparation. And I don't know for sure, but I do believe the reason they've moved away from planning to preparation is because planning is such a loaded term when it comes to education, because it meant there was like a 15-page document that had to be created every fortnight. Whereas when you're thinking of preparation, we're just thinking we're just getting ready. We're just getting ready to teach and for the kids to learn. Then moving on from that, then the next thing that they introduced is that you have this diagram. So at the bottom, you have the teachers are the foundation, that they're committed, skilled, and agentic professionals. And that's really important. And then they added the three pillars. So the whole thing is that you know what needs to be taught, which is your knowledge of the curriculum. You know how to teach it, which is your knowledge of the pedagogy. And after maybe the first week, when you let all the kids sit beside their friends, then all of a sudden you know the kids and you know which ones that need to be moved. But that will come with time, with knowing the kids. And then above that, you have the preparation for teaching and learning. And then you over that, the overarching thing is you have the culture. And it might be the classroom culture, it might be the school culture. So all of that is really important when you're thinking of preparing. You have your knowledge of the curriculum, knowledge of the kids, and the knowledge of how to actually teach it. So the next part then is we just before the circular came, before the document came out, we got circular 4519. And on page 2 of it, it's a really important paragraph. It gives, I suppose, ownership to teachers, that it's in black and white, that you know the kids best. So it says the curriculum recognizes and supports teachers as skilled professionals with the autonomy to make key decisions about teaching and learning in their own school. It includes decisions about what children learn, the sequence in which they learn, the pace at which they learn, and the activities and experiences through which they learn. Which means that you, as be it the class teacher or the special ed teacher, you know the kids best. So you know what they need to learn. You need to know how long they need to spend on a particular topic or skill and kind of how to go about it. And that's a really important paragraph. It's not in the preparation document because it came beforehand. So when we go on to the next part, because from going out to schools, I used to always say, yeah, that's all grand. But what if we get the knock on the door and the Kigger walks in? And so the preparation document talks about there are 4 sources of evidence needed for preparation. So if you get the dreaded knock on the door and the inspector walks in, they are going to be looking at 4 different sources of preparation. you want to think about what they are, but we'll go click on the next one if that's okay. Sorry, Patrick. So there are four. The first one, of course, are the kids. So it might be listening to the kids, getting them to say a song, a poem, asking them questions, maybe looking at some of their work. The minute they walk into the classroom, they're going to look at the learning environment, how everything's going. They may look at the recorded preparation. However, my understanding is it's not really been asked for too much anymore. And so then that you have the final one. And the final one then is you, the teacher. So when you're thinking of it, you are actually a source of evidence. So I'll go through each of these four in detail, in a small bit of detail. So when it comes to the kids and they walk in, the one thing is that the kids are able to describe and demonstrate their learning. So it comes back to that idea of metacognition, that the kids know what they're learning because then they can take ownership over what they're doing. And that's really important. So it could be that you are telling them, okay, today we're going to work on fluency, and I want you to really pay attention to the punctuation. Or it might be that you have a living chart there that you're adding to, that they have, that they can see. All of those things are really important. But one barrier that I have seen to this is sometimes the kids might not have the language to describe what they're learning. So there might be a need for explicit teaching there, that they actually can tell you what they're learning. The next one then we have is the teacher. So again, someone comes in to visit, it could be the principal, it could be the inspector, it could be anyone, and they're going to ask you questions. They're asking questions because you're a source of evidence. It's to find out, as we saw there in the circular, for you, give you an opportunity to explain your choice when it came to what the kids are learning or how they're learning, whatever topic it is, and also maybe why you're spending the extra 2 weeks on a particular thing. And you can just say, well, they just didn't grasp it. So I changed how I approached it. So now we're working towards achieving that goal. But that it's you as a teacher that you can actually explain and elaborate your professional decisions.
Can I come in there,
Of
Maureen?
course.
Yeah. So like this is, I think, the crux of
Mm,
um this whole thing. And like, this is why we run webinars in the evening, and this is why people attend webinars, like people who are with us now. Um, Teachers being able to make knowledgeable decisions and then stand over them and explain them, because as you've said already, uh, they know the kids in the class, and hopefully they have a strong knowledge too of how best to teach literacy, and they can explain why they're doing things in certain ways. And I know I know you're still in Marino there. I'm still on the PATS campus in DCU here. When we go out on school placement, working with student teachers, we're trying to foster that idea that, yeah, you might write X, Y, and Z in your plan, if I can use the word plan, in your
mm,
recorded preparation. Um, and it may go disastrously, but if you can explain the thinking behind it and why you did it in that way, what you might do
mm.
next, that's far more important than anything that's written down on a piece of paper. But this also, I suppose, underlines the importance of teacher knowledge. So
Yeah,
teachers investing time in, if they can find the time, the teachers investing time in really thinking about how they're teaching literacy, why they're teaching it that way, and those kind of professional discussions in school that kind of advance that knowledge as well. And this is one of the most important things in the document, that it demonstrates the teacher as a, yes, as a kind of source of evidence, but also as someone who knows what they're at. And this is what maybe draws a distinction between what we do in Ireland and what sometimes happens internationally, where teachers are very much following scripted programs, not really relying on any great teacher knowledge to any extent. And I think it's very notable that we have a system in Ireland that endorses teachers as kind of professionals who have that knowledge. Sorry, I kind of went off on one there, Maureen. I'll hand back to you again.
no, no, no. But I'll actually just build on what you're saying there, because I think um it's nearly that teachers don't realize. I don't think we realize we're doing it every single day. That when maybe a special ed teacher is coming into the classroom, that you'll have those quick couple of minutes being like, okay, we're actually going to work on this. We're going to leave that because actually when I was working on it today, they're not grasping all of it. So let's have a go at it. Like, all of that is taking place, but maybe we don't put enough mass on it ourselves, that we don't see it for what it is. But yeah, I completely agree with all that. So the next one we look at then is we have the learning environment. So this is actually come back to your slide there, Patrick, from Shanahan, who's talking about the interactions that we want to have as much as possible, having dialogic classrooms where we have quality teacher-child, but also child-child interactions. And I very recently had a conversation with someone where I was talking about teacher-child interactions, but actually child-teacher interactions, where the child might be initiating something to do with their learning with the teacher themselves. And so it's really important to have that culture, because when we're thinking of the learning environment, it's not just the physical classroom that we have there, although displays, no doubt, at this stage, second week in September, they're probably fabulous. But we are thinking also that it's that invisible beliefs and values and the culture that's in the classroom. And then the fourth source of evidence, and this is the last one, is your recorded preparation. And I think it's really, really important. Probably the most important line in the document is the third line here, where it says recorded preparation is first and foremost for the teacher. It is for you to enable you to teach so that the kids can learn. That's it. That is the purpose of the recorded preparation. It serves no other purpose. It is not to look nicely formatted there at the side of your table. It's not that it goes neatly into a folder. It is to enable you to teach so that the children can learn. And then moving from that, there's three very important words they have here is, oh, just go back for 1 second, sorry.
Sorry, I'm too
Is,
eager, Maureen.
yeah, is that your preparation, your recorded preparation needs to be useful, purposeful, and practical. So if you look at the fortnightly that you have at the moment, is it useful? Like, are you using it? Does it serve its purpose? You know, again, purposeful, but also is it practical? You know, they're really important things. Again, the plan is for you and it needs to be useful. And they have at the end that it should be personal and bespoke, that it's giving you permission here because it's in black and white. It's giving you permission to make it your own. So then, Patrick, we could go to the next bit. So I'm going to talk very quickly about short-term planning and long-term planning and what it says in the document, because even though this now is out since 2021, and I know there was a rollout from IDEA, there's still, I suppose, a few misconceptions around the place. So if we go to the next slide, this is a lovely breakdown. And I remember when I saw this table first, I thought it was so funny. The blue side, the department are telling you what to do. The green side, they're telling you what not to do. And it is that simple. We can call it what to consider, what to avoid, but that's what it is. So looking at the blue side for a second, number one, they are telling you that when you're thinking of preparation, once again, there's three types of preparation: your visible, invisible, and your recorded preparation. Looking at the green there for number one, we shouldn't view recorded preparation as the only type of preparation. There is so much more to it. If I then look at number two, and this is an important one because this one comes up quite a bit, the whole school can agree on common features. And I will talk about the common features in a moment. They can agree on the common features. But if we look over at the green, the number two, avoid generic templates. So you can have the same common features, but one teacher might have it represented as a spider diagram. Another one might have it as a lovely table. Another one might have it, I don't know, in some sort of a thematic plan with other subjects. As long as you have the common features according to this, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how it's visually represented. So it talks about the detail contained in the document. Sorry, I'm on the blue, part two. The detail contained in the document may vary from teacher to teacher, depending on their individual preference, their professional judgment, and the context in which they're teaching. Meaning that I'm generalizing here, but if you're an NQT, you might need more detail in your plans because you are starting out, you're trying to figure everything out, than maybe if you're a more seasoned teacher. But I also want to be very clear, I'm also not saying that a seasoned teacher doesn't need planning, just might not need as much detail. And so if I look at the green, what they say there at number 2, halfway down, while all teachers may include common features in their preparation, they may be presented or recorded in a way that's most accessible to you. So I'm going to repeat, coming back, you can have it as a spider diagram. You can have it represented any way. You can have handwritten, you can have it typed. It is entirely up to you as long as you have the common features. So if we
Does
go
that mean
to,
we can use our favorite font as well, Maureen?
absolutely, you can
Great.
highlight it and everything. That's all important.
Okay.
So the next slide then, this is where we look at the common features. So I'm going to go to recorded preparation short term, point 1 there. And they have a kind of broken in a kind of wordy, but there's 3 parts that are highlighted. The very first one is the focus of new learning. The second one is the learning experiences. And the third one is assessment and monitoring. They are your 3 common features that this document says that you have to have in your plan. And then after that, it's entirely up to you. So Patrick, you and I had this conversation yesterday. We were talking about, okay, so you have those 3 Maria boxes, for one of a better way of putting it. But what about if you have all this vocabulary? And we mentioned it earlier as part of the big 5. What do we do there? You can put in another box, or you might put in another box for your the phonics you're teaching, or it might be another box if you're looking at some sort of poetry or rhymes. As long as you have those 3 sections in it, you can put any other box into it that you want. But similarly, once you have those 3 in it, you don't need to put any other one in unless you want it. I'm going to look at just point 2 in the blue down below. Again, really important to keep your recorded preparation concise. The next line I love. The length of the document is not an indication of its quality. And going back, I would have made this comment at the very start of the webinar that for so long there was a culture in Ireland that your teaching, was sometimes nearly measured by the detail that was in your Kuntas Misul. But it's very clearly saying here that's not the case. Looking at the green, again, the green, what you shouldn't do. Avoid spending excessive time writing detailed descriptions of activities. Sometimes it just becomes a copy and paste and you're never actually reading it, and sometimes you might copy and paste it. It might not be exactly what you want in the document. But I think that's really, really important. You don't need detail if you don't need it. Okay, it comes back to making sure that your recorded preparation is for you, to enable you to teach so the kids can learn, and the 3 words that is useful, practical, and purposeful. Okay, so don't have detail in there if you don't need it. And then just go on to the next page for a second there, Patrick.
Yeah. And I have a question then I'm going to bring up after this,
Oh,
Maureen, in the chat, but you
so
keep going.
that's okay. So I just want to come back to um, the 3 areas here, the 3 common features, I should say. So you have your learning outcome are the focus of new learning, your learning experiences, and you have your assessment and monitoring. Now, I have added the questions underneath it, and it's purely just to kind of get me thinking. So when I'm thinking of the focus of new learning, I'm thinking of what are the kids learning? And and for me, I don't put what am I teaching? And the reason I wanted the children learning, because just because you teach it doesn't mean that they learn it. So if you think of how often are you teaching capital letters to that class, doesn't mean they're actually learning it. So straight away, it's bringing you back into, I suppose, viewing things through the eyes of a child. Well, what do they need to learn it? Looking at the learning experiences, how are the children going to learn the focus of new learning? And the final one, the assessment and monitoring. How will I or the child know if the focus of new learning has been learned? So all of it is coming to this focus of new learning. And again, yesterday, Patrick and I had a whole conversation about this. So for me, um, all of your fortnightlies are nearly like building blocks, so that they should be kind of building on each other a small bit. So if I'm looking at my focus of new learning and I am working on comprehension strategies, I'm looking at predicting. The specific part is how you change your prediction as you're going along. That's exactly what I want the kids to learn. However, when I pick up a book, I'm still going to talk about all the conventions of print, the title. We might be predicting based on the picture, might be looking at vocabulary, asking questions. I'm pretty much practicing all the learning outcomes. but what am I explicitly focusing on? What am I explicitly trying to develop this fortnight? And so we kind of you might come in on this one, Patrick, because we
Well,
didn't
yeah,
fully land on the exact same spot with it. But for me, my big thing is the difference between explicit language experiences, language learning experiences versus implicit language learning experiences. And I think we practice language all day, reading, writing, and oral language, but we need to look at what are we explicitly focusing on. And for me, that's that column. But I'll let you come in on it.
so this is we both worked in PTSD, and I know the year
Mm.
that I worked with PTSD, it was during the first rollout of the primary language curriculum. And I moved from there then to work in Mary I. And a question that used to come up a lot, and I think still does to some extent, which is about how many learning outcomes am I addressing? And does that if I'm it's so hard in the language curriculum. Sorry, I have it here. My flowers are my prop. So hard to untangle them because you can't comprehend what you're reading without understanding the vocabulary that's in it, and you can't get to the vocabulary without the word recognition skills that are there. And it's unlikely that you'll ever even get to there if you're not in some way engaged or motivated. So how do we pull these apart and put them into the recorded preparation? I suppose our discussion yesterday was around that piece you just highlighted there, Maureen. It's the new bits that need to go into the recorded preparation. There are certain things, just say you're teaching junior infants in the second half of the year, you'd be introducing new grapheme phoneme correspondences, phonics, every week. It's not that you're just going to do that in January and then not do it again for the year. But so what I think the point that you're making there, Maureen, is that there might be boxes in your scheme that don't necessarily fall under those titles, but that highlight, okay, we're doing, I don't know, d in this fortnight. So there is new stuff that comes up. Like the content might be different, but the learning outcome might actually be developing over time. Have I got that right, Maureen? Was that kind of what we're?
Yeah, so again, when it comes to this, it's you're not writing down every learning outcome that you're covering because you would have to write down every single learning outcome. You're constantly practicing all of them, but you're focusing on, you're trying to pinpoint exactly what you're trying to develop. And I suppose the example I gave to you yesterday, Patrick, was around if you were thinking of oral language. And every lesson is an oral language lesson because you're practicing oral language the entire time. And I remember once a teacher saying to me, well, I have history and there's always discussion, so that's my oral language time there. And I remember asking, so if I was to look at the class having a discussion in September versus them having a discussion in June, what development would have taken place? And they might have gotten better through, I suppose, osmosis nearly, but it's true other things being developed. But if a teacher decides to, right, I'm going to explicitly develop questioning within discussion, or I might explicitly look at how they answer, or even sentence starters, sometimes getting kids going with it, even turn taking, like all of that, if you're, that will be your focus, but you're still going to practice all of them.
Yeah, and it's a case again that not everything has to be written down. So,
Yeah.
you can explain, what's going on in your phonics lesson, even if you haven't written
Yeah.
out every single step that's happening in that given week. So it's when all these sources of preparation come together that the kind of
Mhm.
the magic happens, isn't that it, Maureen?
No, completely,
Yeah.
completely. And so the whole thing when it comes to your preparation is you don't need that much detail. So if you were saying you were working on, again, we'll take the speaking skills within the discussion, you can have that there as your oral language. And then the reason I add the questions in is because I've seen quite often that say the learning experiences, the how might be a list of methodologies that are ticked off, but they're just general methodologies that might be used throughout the week, but they might not be linked directly to the focus of new learning.
Mhm.
And then when it comes to the assessment and monitoring, that once again is linked directly back to the focus of new learning. So again, it's not ticking off a load of assessment methods. And I think, and we spoke again yesterday about, we should have just recorded yesterday's conversation, Patrick.
Yes.
When it comes to assessment for me, there should be, it shouldn't be just an assessment and then you put it into the folder. There should be three actions, one of three actions after assessment. Either number one, you decide, right, they haven't got it. I'm going to go back over it again and spend longer. The second one is they haven't got it. I'm not sure. I might actually change the learning experiences, the how I'm trying to get them to learn it. Or the third one might be, in my opinion, might be, right, you know what? I'm going to park that for a little while because I think I need to work on such and such a thing before I come back to it. But the whole thing with this is that the three areas are interlinked and that your assessment and monitoring might lead to the next fortnight's focus of new learning. Because you might say, right, I need to go back over it. So it's going to be the same thing, but I'll have new learning experiences. So for me, they're your three areas. You can have, as I said, have it as a spider diagram, have it any way you want, but they're your common elements that are listed in the document. Patrick.
Before we go on, can I bring in just a kind of a common stroke question from the chat? And it's,
Mhm.
sometimes visitors to the classroom might ask for particular things that might not necessarily align with
Mhm.
what you have on the screen there, Maureen. Have you any thoughts on that before I start, or do you want me to go first?
I don't mind. I
Go
suppose
ahead.
I'm be very technical about it. You do not need a section for differentiation. And that's the very technical answer. However, I would also fall kind of in with, especially with your focus of new learning or your learning experiences, you can have differentiation within that. So if I was to take my focus of new learning, I might have the whole class might be working on the structure of a procedure, but I might have a small cohort where within procedure, I'm working on bossy verbs. So within your focus of new learning or indeed your learning experiences, you can differentiate that. Okay, so that's all part of it. But I also want to bring you back to the four sources of evidence.
Mm,
You as a teacher are a source of evidence. So if you were to say, if you were asked about it and you were to say, look, I'm differentiating this way, this way, this way, I can record it if you want, wouldn't really be personal and bespoke if you're using the language from it. Um, so you can again, I wouldn't say argue a point, but stand up for yourself, justify what you're
justify
doing,
it.
because sometimes that question might be asked about differentiation just to kind of get an insight into what's happening in the class. But again, come back to very technical. You don't need a box for that according to this document. You can differentiate within the elements. You
Yeah.
want to come in, Patrick, on that?
No, I agree. You said everything I would have said, which is that if, yeah, like you as a source of knowledge, you might never have to write down, I'm going to take that group and do bossy verbs with
Yeah,
you just know, and no,
yeah,
you're no further on in writing it down. And this comes
yeah,
back again, as you said, to the teacher knowledge, teacher being confident in what they're doing,
yeah.
knowing stuff. And I know that can be easier said than done in particular contexts, but that is the long and the short of it. Now, we're a little bit short on time, Maureen,
Yeah,
so
sorry. So we'll fly.
there.
Yeah. So just very quickly with your Kuntis Misul, it's reinforcing the same thing. Have the focus of you learning and also the learning experiences. But I'm loving the green that's over here. What they say is avoid unnecessary detail. A lengthy account of the content taught is not necessarily an indicator of effectiveness. Like that's as great as a line as you can put in. And then it might be helpful to include a brief reflection. It doesn't mean that you need to put it in, because I know some people, their reflection might be their drive home from school. The mean needs to be written down. So you keep going there, Patrick, if that's
Yeah.
okay. Um, just with this, this is coming back to not just the primary language curriculum, but it's across all the new curricula coming out, is that the focus is on the kids and the focus is on the interest, needs, and abilities of all the kids that are there. So when you're thinking of that middle pillar that we showed earlier, knowing the kids, it's knowing what they're interested in, knowing what their needs might be, and their abilities. So keeping that in mind. And if I keep going there, Patrick.
Yeah.
So then again, really quickly, point number 4 there, it talks about the concept, skills, and dispositions. So all learning outcomes are broken down pretty much into concept, skills, and dispositions. And so, Patrick, if I bring you to the next slide for a second, and so all they are here. Oh, I see outcomes. Your concept, skills, and dispositions. Your learning outcomes made up of those. So I said this to Patrick before, and I saw names there. I know people have heard me say this before. The way I understand this is if I wanted a clean kitchen, right? That's my learning out, that's my outcome. I want the clean kitchen. I understand the concept of having a clean kitchen. I would argue I probably have the skills to clean the kitchen, but am I disposed to cleaning the kitchen? I'm not often, let's be honest about it. So if we think of the kids, and again, we take punctuation and capital letters and full stops. And I've taught that every year for the last 4 years, and they're still not getting it. It could be the disposition. There's no need or want for them to write using that. They don't see the purpose of it. And it comes back to, again, Patrick, one of your earlier slides there with the big five. And again, underpinning it, you had motivation, choice, and agency, that the kids need to be motivated. And if it's not intrinsic, it's extrinsic. We need to set up the conditions that is motivating them. So sometimes it can be the concept that they're developing, sometimes the skills, sometimes the disposition. So my advice is if you find you're teaching the same thing, learning outcome, whatever it might be, again and again and again, maybe think of it in terms of skills and dispositions, that maybe it might be dispositions you need to develop. And I won't go into a whole thing of motivation for reading. And then just, I think my last slide, I think, is coming up here. Yes. So in terms of long-term preparation, it very clearly states here what you need to include. So looking at A, B, C, D. So you have your range of learning experiences. So that could be just a general list that you have. Your range of assessment practices. Again, we're still using the assessment guidelines. I think it's from 2005. The PDF is available online, I think, on the NCCA website. You have part C there, the integration of the learning with other curricular areas. So they could be your themes. If you're thinking of Halloween in October, you could be looking at integration there. And D, you have your classroom routines, your culture, your long-term intervention practices, things kind of that might be taking place across the year can be included. When it comes to your long-term planning, and I'm thinking specifically for the primary language curriculum, you do not need to include learning outcomes. You do not need to include learning outcomes for specific months. That is not the case at all, because you might not know the kids when you're writing the plan, and you might not know when they might need it developed. And so when it comes to just the bottom of the blue there, so while you'll prioritize particular learning outcomes based on the interests, needs, and abilities of the children, ensure that the children have an opportunity to engage with the learning described in all learning outcomes across the curriculum. We naturally have learning outcomes that we gravitate towards, but over a 2-year period, the kids should be exposed to all the learning outcomes. And then as well, at the green, what they're saying not to do is, so when recording long-term preparation, avoid specifying when and how long to spend developing learning outcomes. Such decisions should be informed by ongoing assessment, and therefore cannot be made too far in advance. You can't decide that in September. So when you're thinking of your long-term A, B, C, D, that's all you need to include. There, of
Now, Maureen, before I
course.
kind of hop on there, just another question or two I might put to you from the chat.
Okay.
Um, so one is around fortnightlies and the interaction between your Kuntas Misu and your fortnightly.
Yeah.
The question is, can you still tick your fortnightly to become your Kuntas Misu through a tick?
Yeah. Can you go back, I think, 2 slides, maybe
Yeah,
one
I
slide?
can. Tell me when to
Two,
stop.
another one. Another one.
That one?
No, the one before that again. Sorry.
That's all right. This one.
So here, so if I look at point one, the middle of the paragraph here, it says where short-term documentation has clearly outlined the new learning and learning experiences, it may also be used for the purpose of your Kuntis Misul. I would tick away and staple the two of them together. It says
Yeah.
it there, and then yeah,
What
it's
used to be
there in black and white. Sorry.
what was the bane of my life as a teacher was but this was now prior to this guidance coming out, um having to copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste stuff from one template into another one. And at the time I thought, oh, this makes perfect sense. But when with a
Mm,
lot of those practices that we've been doing
yeah.
for a long time, when you stand back from it, you go, oh no. this
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense at all. Why am I actually doing this? So it's good to have that kind of clarification.
And again, that brings us back to the beginning, that this is asking for a change in culture, that there are very clear embedded practices in some schools that we might have to reflect on and look at, is it serving the purpose that a recorded preparation should?
Okay, now we've got about 10 minutes, so we're going to plow on here. And some of the questions I think will be addressed. I know people are asking there about future webinars and how to join LAI. I have some slides on that later. But what we kind of pulled out was taking that big picture thing around the planning. Five things we think are very important at this moment in time to be thinking about for planning for literacy in schools in Ireland. And the first one is around integration. And what we've written there is integration is more important than ever. So we all know that we're on the cusp of new curriculum specifications, and I learned today that they're due to be launched by the minister later this month. So the new specifications for STEM, social and environmental education, arts, language, and well-being. So the new primary curriculum framework is coming closer to, actual enactment in schools. And with the new primary curriculum framework comes new suggested time allocations in the month. And with that comes changes to the amount of time that will be afforded to discrete L1, L2, L3, language one, language two, language three teaching. And this does mean, just being black and white about it, that, for example, in stage three, third to sixth class, what was previously 5 hours under Circular 56 2011 for L1 literacy will be given discrete time of 3 hours and 45 minutes, which is a reduction of 1 hour and 15 minutes. Now, this, I suppose, from a Literacy Association of Ireland perspective and from a literacy practice and research perspective, suggests that more time is going to be needed in many cases outside of that L1 box. And this is where integration becomes really, really important. And we're at a point where we need to think about three different types of integration when we're preparing. First is within L1. So within your literacy teaching, are you linking reading, writing, and oral language? And sometimes with the best will in the world, this doesn't happen. And often that's because of textbooks. So you're reading a certain chapter in a textbook, but you're following the plan Scala for writing genres and they're not lining up. And then there could, perish the thought, be another separate plan that puts you on another track altogether with oral language. And all of a sudden you've a mumble jumble of different things happening across the week. We know that reading enforces writing and writing enforces reading and oral language enforces all of them. So we need to be trying to think about teaching in similar genres, topics, and, like, say, reinforcing vocabulary across the strands. We all know too that the primary language curriculum is premised on the idea that there's integration between languages, so making connections between English and Irish. Sometimes this will happen within a block of time, like within a fortnight or within a month. Sometimes it's more long-term transfer. So, for example, word recognition skills that might be learned in English in first class might not be put into practice in Irish until third or fourth class. But where we can make those connections at that point in the fortnight, we should make them. And the third one is one that's very close to my heart, linking literacy with other subjects. I think that it's totally valid, if not, and not just valid, necessary, that what you're reading about will link with what you're doing in geography. And that within your geography lesson, there'll be some writing or reading happening, that they're reinforcing each other. And I know with teachers that I've worked with, sometimes there can be concern around the idea that those kind of boundaries between the boxes on your timetable become fuzzy. I think they need to be fuzzy in many cases so that that integration can happen. Maureen, did you want to say anything on that before I keep going?
No, but well, the one thing, when you are integrating, I still think you need to be very cognizant of what you're explicitly developing
Yeah.
with your language. So again, that it's not just right, my oral language, where I'm discussing in history, or we were doing some sort of reports in science. That is fantastic to link them, but you need to be clear on, number one, the literacy skills you're developing, but also the science
Yeah.
you
Like
know. So
writing
it's
history
yeah,
stroke literacy on your timetable
yeah,
doesn't all of a sudden mean the kids can read and write in
yeah,
history. It needs to be much more deliberate than that.
yeah,
Okay, in the
yeah,
interest of time, I'm going to keep going. The next one is around really you're going nowhere if you don't have good assessment. So planning with the primary language curriculum is only as good as the assessment that precedes it. Now, there's three questions here on the screen that we think are important to think about. So, what do I want to know from the information that I will gather? So that you're not doing assessment just for the sake of it. Um, have I gathered enough information to give me an accurate overview of what's going on? Right? So is the assessment a good one? Does it actually tell me what I need to know? And how will this justify what I'm going to do next, which Maureen touched on earlier? Now, it mentions on the screen there like various sample kind of assessments that are free or not too expensive. And I am going to post those into the chat if I can find where the chat is on my screen. Oh, I found it now. Hang on. Paste. All right. So they're gone into the chat there now. They're just some sample assessments that you may be familiar with, but or if not, you might find helpful. Point number three, literacy skills develop incrementally and over time. Little and often is more helpful than big blocks of time on particular outcomes. So they may not ever be written in your recorded preparation, but as Maureen said earlier, you're being intentional about learning, bringing in new learning into different learning outcomes, and they're being woven together. There's a term we use with students here called instructional density. So that's that you've got multiple things happening at the same time. Now, I just see someone saying in the question and answers that they cannot see the what I just pasted, which isn't very helpful because the whole point is that you can. So don't worry, we'll get them sent out afterwards, those links, so that you can see them. It's just links to those different things that are on the slide. The next point there, number four. Often it can be very hard to know where to start. And the guidance that Maureen outlined is that there's knowledge of the children, knowledge of the context, and so on. There is no one starting point, but I know when I'm working with student teachers, often it's the books you're working with, the texts that are often the most straightforward way to kind of get a handle on what it is that you're doing. I have some samples of text sets that I'll also include in that link that goes out because I can't, unfortunately, send it to you now on the chat. But there can be, you can use text sets, so texts that are on a similar topic, obviously novels and children's literature, and more controlled texts like decodable texts. And just the balance between them is something that's important to think about. Slide here is like a modification of work by Wiley Blevins. You can see that it is the case that more controlled texts like decodables need a good bit of attention in the early years, but that should really wane as we move up through the school. But neither is it the case that kids should only be exposed to decodables in or like kind of leveled books in one form or another in the early years. They should also still be hearing or exposed to other children's literature. And throughout their time in school, kids should be having enjoying read alouds, having time to choose books from the library. So there's a bit of a balancing act that goes on there, and depending on what class you're in, different things need to be considered. And the last point here is programs and textbooks. So, right, often it can seem like the official line from someone like us in a college, Maureen, contradict me now if you don't agree, is textbooks, no, no textbooks. But I think we both discussed this already yesterday. That's just not realistic. Programs and textbooks, they're not your enemy, but neither are they necessarily your friend. And you need to stop and think, is it actually helpful what you're using from this textbook, or is it more so kind of putting a straitjacket on what you're doing in the classroom? And we know as well that AI has a particular role to play, could be very helpful for things like differentiating texts, coming up with short texts on particular topics if what you put in the prompt is clear enough. Um, and I'm not sure, Maureen, maybe in a few years, that recorded preparation piece that we spoke about earlier will be even more different again, because I think a lot of the more that we'll call it the secretarial part of doing your short-term and long-term preparation is soon going to be a thing of the past because AI will be able to do a lot of it. Do you agree?
yeah, no, completely. I was even looking at a reel very recently, and the prompts were, for the curriculum of the Republic of Ireland or whatever it might be, create a lesson for um the we'll say third class around whatever, and you gave the prompts and it gave it, So it's coming down the line,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I'd say if
And
you
is already there in a lot of places.
Yeah, if you find it helpful to use it, we can't go into it in any great depth tonight, but I'd say
Mm.
go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
I just seen that the stuff has gone to everyone in the chat, and the reason was because I clicked the wrong button. I needed to say to everyone, not just to Maureen when I sent it earlier. So sorry about that, everyone. We're going to wrap up by just highlighting a few things that's coming up with LAI, and hopefully you found the last hour or so helpful on the planning front. One of the questions was how can you join? If you want to join, all the information's on our website, literacyireland.com. We're also all over social media. We've some very active committee members. I'll give a shout out to Emma, who is keeping everything up to date on social media. So do follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok if you're so inclined. The membership, if you want to join, you can see the full address there, literacyireland.com/membership. And one of the other questions that came in was around upcoming webinars, and we're delighted to say that we've lots of upcoming webinars that you might want to tune into. Unfortunately, I see already the formatting is wrong on the next one, but you can still get the idea. This evening, next week, so 1 week from this evening, we are returning to the topic of dyslexia. We had huge interest in a webinar earlier this year on this topic and lots of questions that we didn't get to. So we had a close look at dyslexia in April. We're going to have an even closer look at dyslexia next week. And registration is free via the Navan Education Centre. Later in October, we have a webinar link, very relevant to some of what we talked about this evening. In Urdagus and Agar, Cunas Lawer Around the Lehori Oga Nagailga. This will focus on reading in Irish and choosing appropriate materials for reading in Irish, presented by Jackie De Bruyne and Roisin Ní on our committee. And we're very excited also that we have a webinar specifically on post-primary literacy by Jessie Ricketts, who's done loads of work in this area in England. So if anyone you know is a post-primary teacher and did not tune into all this planning lark that the primary teachers were looking at over the last hour, maybe let them know. 21st of October, that's also free.
Can I
Um,
just come in one thing?
well, Maureen, yeah.
I was just going to say that when you join the LAI, there's basically a section of it with all our previous recorded webinars. So you have this one, and even if you missed the first one with dyslexia, you can go back and watch it. But unfortunately, you'd have to become a member first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maureen. Good reminder. And then the very last thing before we wrap up is if literacy is your jazz and you're really into this stuff, and if you're here still at 8 o'clock, you probably are, I would encourage you to consider attending our conference. So we have a very special 50th anniversary of the Literacy Association. Our conference is taking place on the 7th and 8th of November here on the PATS campus in DCU. Registration is open now. Have a look at it and see. We're hoping to put up the full program over the next few weeks. But what I can share is our keynote, Catherine Snow from Harvard, who'll be jetting over in November. We have over 100 presenters on everything from early childhood through to adult literacy on anything you can imagine on literacy. And obviously lots of opportunities as well to chat and talk and get ideas from other teachers over the 2 days of the conference. We'll finish there, Maureen. Thanks
Yeah,
a million. Thanks everyone for
absolutely.
joining in, and stay in touch.
And best of luck for the year ahead.